Hi there, my name is Bev, and today I've got my monthly reading wrap-up for October 2020. This October, I really tried to get into the creepy vibes, but it was kind of difficult. Usually by this time of the year, the weather in Portland has turned really terrible. I mean, gray all the time, raining every day, but it just hasn't happened yet. It's still really sunny, and the tree in my backyard hasn't even lost all of its leaves. Like, I bought a leaf blower so I could deal with it, and it's like, hello. Not that I'm complaining. I honestly love the sunshine. I kind of have a hard time coping with the gray winters, so I've appreciated it, but it's not been so easy to get into the Halloween feelings. I tried to read a bunch of horror books, I decorated a little bit, but it just wasn't all the way there. It's also been my first month on BookTube, and I've been having so much fun. I really appreciate so much that people are in the comments chatting with me, and to everyone that has subscribed, thank you. That means so much to me that you would want to keep watching my videos. I love it. BookTube is such a cool community, and I'm really happy to be carving out my little corner of it. Thank you so much for being here. So for October, I read 10 books, and it's quite the mix. There are some duds, we've got some 5-star reads. I read horror, fantasy, nonfiction. It's nothing if not eclectic. So without further ado, let's just get into the reading wrap up. The first book I read this month was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. I read this one as an audiobook. So in Station 11, there's a pandemic that spreads incredibly rapidly and kills like more than 99% of humans. Civilization collapses pretty quickly and technology goes by the wayside. The book also follows a strange timeline. It's non-linear and it's not always clear what the central thread is connecting everything. The novel starts out with a Hollywood actor that dies right at the very beginning of the pandemic in Toronto. And then the A plot of the book follows this woman who has kind of a tenuous connection to this actor 15 years in the future as she makes her way through the countryside with a traveling symphony. The book then also jumps to this actor's early days of his career and his different relationships. He has a number of wives. You're kind of reading along, trying to solve the mystery and waiting for all of these different plot elements to click together and make sense. I gave this book 3 stars. I liked it. It was fine. It did what it came to do. I'm the kind of person that really loves an apocalypse story, but the dystopian aftermath for me is like, meh. So unfortunately, that did color kind of how I felt about Station 11. I got sucked in because I knew that it was going to have this apocalyptic pandemic aspect to it, but then also that there was a cult aspect. So those were the things that really drew me in, and ultimately they were not main parts of the book. I didn't so much care for the traveling symphony. The characters that made up that group were just sort of forgettable to me. While the main antagonist of this book is a cult leader, you don't actually get to spend any time with him or his followers to understand what's going on there. They're very much in the background, just kind of lurking and coming after the traveling symphony members. So if you're gonna lure me in with the promise of cults, give me cults. Don't just say that there are some cults in the background there. That doesn't actually do it for me. The next books that I read were actually a trilogy. That is the Shades of Magic trilogy by V.E. Schwab. So we've got A Darker Shade of Magic, A Gathering of Shadows, and A Conjuring of Light. I would normally hold these up, but I'm gonna put them down because it's a lot and kind of heavy. So this is a multiverse fantasy series that's set in the 1800s. The idea is that the world we live in now is like the gray world, but then there's also a red world, another version of where we live now, where magic is plentiful, they're thriving, it's awesome, happy place. Then there's a white world, and in that universe, magic has been corrupted, it's a very unsafe place to live and really unhappy. And then there is the black universe, and there magic has been completely driven out of control and the entire world basically collapsed in on itself. It's walled off from everything else. You can't go there. You actually can't go to any of these places. There's only a special kind of magician that is able to travel in between the universes, and our main character, Kel, is one of those magicians. So he acts as a representative of the red world, and he speaks to leadership in the other universes on behalf of his king. And I just told you everything cool about this series. It didn't do much for me beyond the premise. I did do a video where I read all 3 of those books together. It started as a reading vlog and turned into a bit of a rant. So I do recommend that you check that out if you want to see more of my thoughts on it. I don't want to get too into it here because I don't want to make myself annoyed again. This one was rough for me because I'm not a big fantasy reader. I want to get more into fantasy, and I thought that this would be a good first foray, and it very much turned me off. If nothing else, it taught me what I don't like and showed me what kinds of things I should avoid as I get further into fantasy. This series is extremely popular, and V.E. Schwab as a writer I think also is having a really big moment, and for those reasons I think I felt a little bit shy to go really hard against it, on top of the fact that I went into that thinking that I was really going to love it and was surprised by the fact that I didn't. So originally I gave the books in order a star rating of 3, 2, 3. However, now that I'm looking more into the Goodreads ranking system, I don't think that that was actually appropriate. On Goodreads, a 5-star means it was amazing. 4 stars, I really liked it. 3 stars, I liked it. 2 stars, it was okay. 1 star, I did not like this. I think my star rating for the first book in the series, A Darker Shade of Magic, definitely still stands. I did like that book. I thought that the introduction to the characters was really cute, the magic system was fun to get to know, and that really did give you the most of the multiverse premise. However, the second book was awful. I gave it a 2-star, but I honestly think that it was not okay. There were a lot of things that were not okay about that book, so I am downgrading it officially to a 1-star. The final book in the trilogy, though, did do a pretty decent job at wrapping things up. It had a lot of problems, and honestly, I probably wouldn't even say that I liked it. I think that I can only say that it was just okay. So that book also is getting downgraded to a 2-star. Now, I've not totally written off V.E. Schwab. I did pick up a copy of The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. That book is getting crazy hype, and I am excited to read it. I think that the premise sounds really cool, and I think it could be a nice one, but if it is anything like the Shades of Magic trilogy, then I might be disappointed. We'll see, and I'll let you know. The next book I want to talk about is Shiver by Junji Ito. This is a horror manga and a collection of 11 different short stories. They all have a really weird premise. Like, there are these murderous hot air balloons that have the shape of everybody's faces. There's a monster that just happens to be a supermodel and nobody questions it. The worst one is this little boy who just drinks oil constantly and his face just turns into a complete tableau of zits. I'll insert a photo so that you can see it more clearly, but it's one of the grossest images that I've ever seen in my life. I think about it every day. It's still so nasty. And I think that that is really the main thing that this book has going for it. Unfortunately, as weird as these story concepts are and as amazing and horrifying as the art is, there's really very poor plot conclusions. All of the stories just kind of end unceremoniously. It gives you no satisfaction, the payoff is terrible, and unfortunately, I hear that's what a lot of Junji Ito stories are like. So as much as I really love his art and I love getting scared by it and thrilled by it, I probably am going to relegate it to library pickups only from now on. I do recommend that you check it out. The art is really, really freaky. You will have a visceral reaction to it, which is really cool, but just like check it out from the library because I think the plot is gonna disappoint you. Another horror book that I read is The Troop by Nick Cutter. This one I did as an audiobook and I highly recommend it. I think the audiobook was really great. This book is about our troop leader who takes his 5 teen scouts to an island for kind of like a camping excursion. They come across a very sick man and they try to help him, but unfortunately this man is infected with a very communicable and insidious disease and all hell breaks loose. I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that he is ill with bioengineered parasitic worms. Parts of the novel are bookended by news articles and government documents that are kind of going into how this parasitic worm was engineered, but the central story is around these 5 boys and their will to survive. I love this book. I gave it a 5 out of 5. I will 100% read it again. It was so gross. I've never read a book that disgusted me this much. I loved it. This is very much a horror fan's horror book. If you do not have the stomach for horror, if you scare easily, I do not recommend that you read this book at all. But if you can take it, you 100% need to check it out. It's weird, it's wild, it's amazing. I actually want to show off 2 more 5-star reads that I did this month, and that is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer and The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. Braiding Sweetgrass I did do as an audiobook. I just talked about these in my very last video on Native American American Heritage Month, so I highly recommend that you check that video out. I really want to highlight Indigenous Lit, especially this month, and these books were incredible. Like I said, they were 5 out of 5 reads. I have an additional 5 out of 5 recommendation for you, and then I also share my TBR for the month. I'm participating in the Indigathon read-along this month, hosted by Brody and Michelle, so I think that's gonna be really fun. I'm excited to read some more of that, and definitely check out that video, hear what I have to say about these 2 books. These are 2 very different books. The Only Good Indians is a horror novel, Braiding Sweetgrass is like a scientific nonfiction, so they might appeal to very different types of people, but I loved them both, so maybe you will too. The next book is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This is another one that I did as an audiobook. It is a gothic romance about a young woman that has a whirlwind romance with a man that is much older and much wealthier than she is. They get married and return to his palatial home, and then our main character ends up finding herself competing against her new husband's late wife, Rebecca, or rather her spirit, because she's dead. Everybody talks about Rebecca, how beautiful she was, how charming, she threw the best party, she really knew how to decorate. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Danvers, is actually particularly loyal to Rebecca's spirit, and because of that, she ends up being incredibly cruel to the main character, plays a lot of mind games with her, and really has her doubting herself and her new husband's affections. However, the circumstances around Rebecca's death are not actually as straightforward as they seem. There's more than meets the eye here. I thought this book was okay. I did a video on this one where I compare it to the new Netflix adaptation, so check that out if you're interested in hearing a little bit more. I loved the description of the house, I love the time period. The opening romance where they're getting to know one another in Monte Carlo is actually really lovely. There were a lot of parts of the book that I did like okay, but ultimately I found the plot to be kind of meh. I thought that it could have done a better job of showing more shades of gray when it came to Rebecca and also with the husband, Maxim de Winter. The kind of resolution and end takeaways of the book left me scratching my head a little bit. It does make me want to read more books about this time period, but probably not want to read more gothic romances. And the last book that I read this month was I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. This one I read for my local book club. We haven't had our meeting yet, so I'm excited to see what everybody thought. Michelle McNamara was a journalist and she had a blog, truecrimediary.com, so she was definitely a pretty big name in true crime. She gave this insidious criminal a new moniker, the Golden State Killer. You might have heard about him before as the East Area Rapist or the Ear, or the original Night Stalker. Michelle McNamara was incredibly devoted to finding the identity of this killer, and this book is the story of her investigation, but also is a timeline of this man's crimes. She doesn't punch up details unnecessarily and doesn't manufacture suspense. The book actually is just terrifying because the crimes themselves are horrific. This man attacked suburban couples. He would sneak into their homes while they were gone and wait until they would come home and go to sleep. He'd wake them up in the middle of the night with a bright flashlight to the face, and then the terror would begin. I really appreciated that this book as a true crime novel was not salacious. I really felt that Michelle McNamara treated the victims with respect. Michelle McNamara unfortunately passed away before she could complete this book, so it's very much an unfinished work. Some of her collaborators worked with her husband to complete it and get it published, so it's really sweet and shows how important she was to this community of citizen detectives as well as investigators of the crime. I definitely had a big true crime phase, and the original Night Stalker was one of my kind of pet cases. I followed up on it. I loved seeing what everybody thought, who it could be, where they thought he was. I definitely thought that he died. I figured that there was no way that this person could have evaded capture for this long. It was kind of amazing to be wrong. I found out the morning that it happened. I was getting ready for work and I saw the news article pop up that they identified and captured this man, and I like woke up my husband. I was like, they got him. They got the Golden State Killer. Like, he had no idea what I was talking about. I just like was bubbling with excitement. I had to get it out and tell someone. And I was definitely not the only one. Michelle McNamara did an amazing job of giving this case a ton of publicity. I mean, for days, I would be walking around town and literally hear people on street corners talking about the case. Considering that I was so into this case, I really put off reading this book. There are a lot of mixed reviews and a lot of mixed feelings about Michelle McNamara. Her husband is really famous. He's Patton Oswalt. It seems like a lot of people think that she's gotten unfair attention because of her husband. Honestly though, I'm glad to say that I came came down on the side of really enjoying her writing. I thought it was very bittersweet to see how much Michelle gave of herself to investigating this case, and unfortunately she didn't get to see it solved. The fact that Michelle wasn't able to finish the book, and also that the killer was apprehended not long after the book was published, does knock it down a couple of pegs, unfortunately. It's definitely not fair, but it does take away from the experience of reading the book. I wish that Michelle McNamara would have had the opportunity to give it a more cohesive ending, and maybe also even just had a little bit more time, because I would have loved to see what she had to say about the killer once they found out his true identity. Okay, those were my October reads. Have you read any of these? Are you going to read any of these? Let me know in the comments. I would love to chat with you about it. All right, I appreciate you so much for being here, and I will see you in the next video.